morning of July 17, 1987, crept over St. Tammany Parish like a fever-breaking, slow and heavy. The humidity a palpable weight that pressed against your skin long before the sun dared to climb above the horizon. The air hung thick with the scent of mud and cypress resin, undercut by a sour, creeping tang of decay that rose from the low places where water pooled and never quite drained. The sky was a bruised expanse of gray, streaked with veins of sickly yellow, sagging into the treetops as if too weary to lift itself higher. My name is Eric Renshaw, and for 7 years I'd been a contract forester for the state of Louisiana. A job that sent me trudging through the bayous and pine thickets of the parish, clipboard in hand, mapping the slow, relentless pulse of the wilderness. It wasn't a calling, not some grand purpose, just a steady gig that paid the bills, a way to escape the sterile buzz of fluorescent lights and breathe the air I'd known since I was a kid, splashing through the black water with a stick in one hand and a jar for fireflies in the other. I'd grown up here, in a tangle of parishes where the horizon flattened into an endless haze of green and brown, where the cypresses stood like silent priests, their roots sprawling beneath the surface, clutching secrets I'd never thought to question until that day. I figured it'd be a routine slog, a survey of the cypress swamps near a stretch the locals called Dead Man's Hollow, a name I'd always dismissed as the kind of yarn old-timers spun over flickering porch lights, their voices low and conspiratorial, to keep kids from wandering too far into the shadows. I parked my pickup on the edge of the tract, a rusted Chevy that groaned when I slammed the door, its paint chipped from years of gravel roads and careless branches. My boots sank into the soft, wet earth as I stepped out, the ground yielding with a faint squelch, and sweat beaded under the brim of my cap, trickling down my neck to soak the collar of my shirt before I'd even slung my pack over my shoulder. The place had a stark, desolate beauty, bald cypresses rising from the murky water like sentinels, their trunks gray and weathered, their branches draped in Spanish moss that hung like tattered veils, swaying faintly in the humid breeze that barely stirred the heat. The water stretched out before me, black and oily, its surface flecked with bits of moss and leaves, rippling now and then with the bubble of something unseen breaking through. A fish, a turtle, or maybe just the swamp exhaling. The survey area skirted a patch of bog and shadow the locals avoided, a place they whispered about in hushed tones, their eyes darting as if the name alone might summon something from the dark. I'd mentioned the job to a few folks that week. Miss Clara at the diner, her apron dusted with flour as she poured my coffee, her smile tightening when I said where I was headed. Old man Thibodeau, leaning against his gas pump with a cigarette dangling from his lips, his weathered hands pausing mid-motion as he squinted at me. Their reactions were the same. Eyes narrowing, mouths pulling into thin lines, a mix of pity and disbelief I couldn't quite decipher. Thibodeau had muttered something about Dead Man's Hollow not being fit for trespassing, his voice a low rasp that carried the weight of years spent listening to the swamp's secrets, but I'd laughed it off, chalking it up to the superstitions that clung to these bayous like moss to a fallen log. My partner for the day, Troy Winslow, rolled up 10 minutes later, his beat-up Ford spitting gravel as he parked beside me, the engine coughing before it died. He was a wiry guy, all sharp angles and restless energy, with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow that made him look older than his 20-something years, and a habit of narrating his every move like he was auditioning for a radio show that never got picked up. He was new to the department, assigned to shadow me as part of his onboarding, and as he climbed out, stretching his arms with a groan, he cracked a joke about the swamp smelling worse than his ex-wife's gumbo, his grin lopsided and forced. It fell flat, the humidity swallowing the humor before it could land, but I gave him a nod anyway. Solo surveys could stretch into endless, lonely hours, and even his chatter was a lifeline against the silence that pressed in from all sides. We started on the southern edge of the tract, marking our path with orange flagging tape that fluttered like tiny flames against the green, tying them to low branches and roots as we went. The air buzzed with cicadas, their drone a relentless hymn that pulsed through the trees, blending with the croak of frogs and the occasional splash of water disturbed by something unseen. The ground was soft, my boots sinking deeper with each step, the mud sucking at my soles like it wanted to claim me, releasing me only reluctantly with a wet, slurping sound. The water lapped at our ankles, black and slick, its surface reflecting the dense canopy above in fractured, shifting patterns. By noon, we'd cataloged a handful of dead cypress stands, their trunks skeletal and peeling, victims of blight or the rising water that drowned their roots, and flagged patches were invasive vines. Kudzu and strangler fig were choking out the natives, their tendrils curling around the trees like greedy, grasping fingers, pulling them down into the mire. It was rote work, the kind I could do with my eyes half closed, my clipboard smudged with sweat and ink, my pencil dulled from scratching notes about root rot, canopy density, and the faint scars of old wildfires etched into the bark. The sun climbed higher, its heat a weight pressing through the leaves, and I wiped my brow with the back of my hand, glancing at Troy as he swatted at a mosquito the size of a quarter, its whine cutting through the cicada song like a needle through fabric. Then he stopped, mid-step, his hand raised, his head cocked like a hound catching a scent on the wind. "You hear that?" he asked, his voice slicing through the swamp's hum, sharper than usual, edged with something I couldn't yet name. Curiosity, maybe, or the first stirrings of unease. I paused, straining to listen, my breath held as I tuned out the familiar chorus. Cicadas whining, frogs croaking, the rustle of moss in the faint breeze. At first, it was just that, the swamp's endless hymn. But then I caught it. A faint, rhythmic thudding, low and steady, rolling across the water like a distant drumbeat. It was muffled, far off, but persistent. A sound that didn't belong among the natural chatter. Too mechanical for the wild, too alive for the rusted relics of oil pumps I knew dotted the parish miles away. I shrugged, told him it was probably one of those pumps chugging along, a half-hearted explanation that sounded hollow even to me. But his eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon where the trees blurred into a wall of green and shadow. He didn't look convinced, his jaw tightening as he shifted his weight. But he nodded, and we kept moving, the tape fluttering behind us like a breadcrumb trail we might need later. The sound grew louder as we pushed deeper into the tract, more insistent, a pounding that seemed to vibrate through the soft earth, resonating in my chest like a second heartbeat I couldn't shake. It was unsettling in its regularity, too precise for the chaos of nature, too visceral for the machinery I'd pinned it on. We paused again, leaning against a cypress, its bark rough and cool against my palm, the tree's roots sprawling into the water like veins sinking into flesh. I noticed something else, an absence. The cicadas had gone quiet, their drone snuffed out as if someone had flipped a switch. No birds called from the branches, no frogs splashed in the shallows. It was just that relentless thudding, filling a vacuum where life should have been. A stillness that made the hair on my neck prickle and my pulse quicken. The swamp felt like it was holding its breath, watching us through the shadows of its branches, the moss swaying faintly as if stirred by unseen eyes. Troy suggested we veer west, sticking closer to the designated boundary of our survey area and away from Dead Man's Hollow itself. Though the terrain was starting to blur the lines on our maps, the water and roots conspiring to erase the edges we'd drawn. The swamp had a way of swallowing straight lines, turning paths into meandering loops, its surface a labyrinth of reflections and half-submerged obstacles. The drumming faded as we shifted course, its echo lingering faintly in the distance, and that should have eased the knot tightening in my chest. But the silence clung to us, heavy and wrong, a weight that pressed against my ribs and made every breath feel labored. A couple of hours later, we stopped for lunch on a rare dry patch, a hummock of earth rising just above the water, its surface matted with pine needles and moss, a small island of respite in the endless wet. Troy unwrapped a sandwich, the crinkle of foil loud in the quiet, the smell of peanut butter and stale bread mingling with the swamp's damp musk. I sat cross-legged, jotting notes in my logbook, the pencil scraping against the damp paper, leaving faint, smudged lines about dead stands and vine encroachment. The air was still, the heat a blanket that made every breath feel like sipping soup, and I swatted at a fly buzzing near my ear, its drone a solitary sound in the oppressive hush. That's when it hit. A scream, sharp and guttural, slicing through the swamp like a blade through flesh, raw and human. A sound that froze us both mid-motion. Troy's sandwich hovered halfway to his mouth, crumbs clinging to his fingers. My pencil stilled above the page, the lead trembling in my grip. The echo lingered, bouncing off the cypresses, a jagged ripple through the stillness, then vanished, leaving a ringing silence that pressed against my eardrums. Troy muttered something about a gator's mating call, his voice thin and unsteady, his hands trembling as he fumbled to rewrap his food, but his eyes betrayed him. They were wide, darting, searching the shadows. We both knew better. That wasn't an animal. It was desperation, pain, a cry that clawed at the air and left it bleeding, a sound that sank into my bones and stayed there. We sat there, breaths shallow, the sandwich forgotten, the logbook slipping from my lap into the moss. The smart move was to turn back, hightail it to the truck, radio it in, and let someone else deal with whatever or whoever was out there. But protocol gnawed at me, a stubborn thread of duty woven into years of training. If someone was hurt, lost, or worse, we couldn't just leave them to the swamp's mercy. I fumbled for my radio, the plastic slick with sweat, and pressed the button, my voice steadier than I felt. Dispatch, this is Renshaw, tract 47. Potential emergency, heard a scream. Investigating. The response was garbled, a hiss of white noise punctuated by faint, broken syllables, but I caught an acknowledgement. Copy, Renshaw. Before it cut out, the static swallowing the rest. We headed toward the sound, my boots sinking deeper with each step, the mud sucking at my soles like it wanted to hold me back, the water rising to my calves, cold and black against my skin. The air grew fouler, a mix of rotting leaves and stagnant water, something sharper beneath it all, a metallic edge that caught in my throat. The first sign we found was a boot, half submerged in the mire, its leather scuffed and soaked, its laces torn clean through as if yanked off in a hurry, the frayed ends trailing in the mud. I crouched, tracing the edge with my finger, the damp leather cool against my skin, the sole worn but intact. Someone's lifeline out here, discarded like trash. A few yards on, another boot, caked in mud, abandoned in a tangle of roots, its tongue lolling out like a dead thing's. Maybe they got lost, I said, more to myself than Troy, my voice low, panicked, shed their gear to lighten the load. It didn't add up. Boots were survival in this swamp, not something you ditch unless you had no choice, unless something forced you. But the alternative gnawed at me, a shadow I didn't want to face, a possibility too dark to voice. The ground turned wetter, the air thicker with the stench of rot, a cloying miasma that coated my lungs. Rotting vegetation, dead fish, something heavier, more alive. Troy gagged, pressing his sleeve to his nose, his face paling, and I felt my own stomach lurch, the smell sinking into my pores like oil. Then we saw it. A pile of torn clothing, scraps of fabric tangled in the gnarled roots of a cypress, smeared with dark stains. Mud, maybe, or something worse, the edges too wet to tell. The pieces were shredded, not cut, the fibers frayed and jagged, caught in the tree like a spider's web had snared them mid-flight. A flannel sleeve here, a strip of denim there, fluttering faintly in the breeze. Troy swore under his breath, his survey rod gripped like a weapon, his knuckles white against the metal, and I hushed him, my finger to my lips, the silence pressing in again, oppressive and alive, making every rustle of leaves deafening, every breath a betrayal of our presence. I scanned the area, my eyes catching on footprints, enormous, claw-like, with long, misshapen toes that dug deep into the mud, the impressions sharp and fresh, water seeping into the edges. They weren't human, weren't bare, weren't anything I'd seen in 7 years of tromping these swamps. Their shape warped, elongated, the claws curling like hooks. Beside them, a trail of disturbed earth, streaks and gouges like something heavy had been dragged. The mud churned into a dark, wet smear that glistened in the dim light filtering through the canopy. Troy's voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "We should go, Eric. Now." His eyes were wide, pleading, the fear in them mirroring the cold sweat trickling down my spine. But I shook my head, my jaw tight. "Just a little farther," I said, half expecting a hoax. A prank by bored locals, a prop left to scare off surveyors, half dreading the truth that crouched in the back of my mind, waiting to pounce. I radioed dispatch again, my thumb slick on the button, my voice steady despite the tremor in my gut. "Dispatch, Renshaw. Found boots, clothing. Following tracks." All I got was static, A wall of noise that swallowed my words. The radio's crackle a lifeline severed. They'd worked fine that morning, their hiss a tether to the world beyond the swamp. But now they were dead, useless as the boots we'd found, leaving us alone with the silence and the tracks. We followed them, the air growing fouler, the trees closing in, their branches tangling overhead like a cage, the moss hanging heavier, brushing against my face like cold, damp fingers. The prince led us to a clearing, a patch of open ground surrounded by cypresses, the water receding just enough to expose the soft, black earth. And there it was, a nest crude and deliberate, woven from branches, mud, and bones, sprawling low to the ground like a wound in the swamp's skin. Its edges were jagged, bristling with broken twigs and reeds, the structure sagging under its own weight, a grotesque parody of a beaver's dam or a bird's roost. The bones glinted white in the dim light, animal mostly, cracked and gnawed, the delicate spines of rabbits, the thicker femurs of deer. But some were too long, too straight, unmistakably human. Skulls with empty sockets, ribs half buried in the muck, a jawbone scored with teeth marks that didn't match any predator I knew. The stench was sharp, metallic, a decay that stung my nose and turned my stomach, a mix of rust and rot that clung to the back of my throat like a second skin. I stepped closer, my boots sinking into the mud, the nest's surface shifting faintly as if alive, the bones clattering against each other with a hollow, dry sound. Troy stood frozen, his rod trembling in his hands, his breath coming in shallow gasps, the color drained from his face. A branch snapped to our right, loud and deliberate, a crack that shattered the silence like glass, and we spun, my breath catching in my chest, my heart slamming against my ribs. At first, it was just shadow, a flicker between the trees, a trick of the light filtering through the moss. But then it stepped into view, massive, 8 feet tall, hunched and grotesque, its fur patchy and mangy, clinging to its frame like wet rags plastered to a skeleton. Its head was wolf-like but wrong, elongated, the snout too narrow, the jaws gaping to reveal rows of jagged, uneven teeth, yellowed and sharp as broken glass, glistening with saliva or something darker. Its limbs were too long, too thin, jerking with a strange, uneven gait, like a puppet strung by a madman. Its claws flexing at the ends, long, curved, black as the swamp water. Its eyes were black, glinting like polished obsidian, and they fixed on us with a cold, predatory gleam that rooted me to the spot, my blood turning to ice. Troy panicked, his nerve breaking like a dam giving way, and he bolted, crashing through the underbrush, his boots splashing in the shallow water, his cries sharp and frantic, "Eric, run!" echoing back through the trees. The creature's head snapped toward him, its eyes narrowing, and it moved, faster than anything that size should, a blur of fur and claws vanishing into the shadows after him. "Troy!" I shouted, my voice raw, but he was gone, swallowed by the swamp, his screams bouncing off the cypresses, high and ragged, a sound that clawed at my skull. I didn't think. I ran, adrenaline flooding my veins, my boots slipping in the mud as I chased the sound, branches clawing at my face, tearing at my sleeves, the swamp a maze of roots and water that twisted around me, slowing me down. I heard him scream again, a sound that rose and broke, then cut off too abruptly, replaced by a wet, tearing noise, flesh parting, bones snapping, that turned my stomach to ice and sent a shiver down my spine. When I found him, he was slumped against a cypress, his chest torn open, ribs splayed like broken wings, blood pooling beneath him in a dark, glistening stain that seeped into the mud, turning it blacker still. His eyes were wide, staring at nothing, his mouth frozen in a silent cry, his hands limp at his sides, the survey rod lying useless a few feet away. The creature stood over him, its head cocked, sniffing the air with a curious, almost thoughtful tilt, its claws flexing, dripping red onto the ground, the blood mixing with the water in thin, swirling tendrils. It didn't see me at first, not until my boot snapped a twig underfoot, the crack loud as a gunshot in the silence, echoing through the clearing. Its gaze locked onto me, those black eyes boring into mine, and it let out a low rumble, more snort than roar, a sound that vibrated through my bones and set my teeth on edge. Terror rooted me to the spot, a primal, animal fear I'd never known. My breath shallow and sharp, my mind screaming at me to move, to run, but my legs refused, heavy as lead. My hand went to my belt, fumbling, grasping for the pistol I always carried. A .38 snub nose, nothing fancy but enough to drop a gator or a drunk poacher. But I remembered too late. I'd left it in the truck, locked in the glove box, a rookie mistake that hit me like a punch to the gut, a wave of self-loathing crashing over me. Stupid, stupid, stupid. I grabbed a branch from the ground, thick and splintered, its bark rough against my palms, holding it in front of me like a shield, my hands trembling so hard I could barely grip it, the wood slick with sweat. The creature stepped closer, its head tilting, studying me, its jaws parting wider as if testing the air, a low hiss escaping its throat. I threw the branch, a desperate heave, my arms burning with the effort, and it struck square in the face, the impact jarring a flinch from it. A twitch of its head, a snarl curling its lips, just enough. I turned and sprinted, my legs pumping through the mud, the swamp stretching endlessly before me. Every tree a twin of the last, every shadow a threat closing in. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the brush, its guttural breathing a steady, relentless rhythm growing closer, louder. The sound of its claws tearing at the roots and vines a cacophony of destruction. My lungs burned, my boots slipped, the mud clinging like hands trying to pull me under, dragging at my ankles with every step. Branches whipped my face, left stinging welts across my cheeks, my vision blurring with sweat and fear. But I didn't stop, couldn't stop, the truck my only thought, my only salvation. I stumbled, my knee slamming into a root, pain shooting up my leg, but I pushed on, the taste of blood in my mouth from biting my tongue. The tree line broke, the Chevy's rusted hood glinting like a beacon in the gray light, and I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut, my fingers fumbling with the lock, the metal cold against my skin. The creature emerged seconds later, pacing back and forth just beyond the windshield, its body half-crouched, claws scraping the metal with deep, screeching gouges that set my teeth on edge, the sound a nails on chalkboard shriek that burrowed into my skull. I jammed the key into the ignition, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it, the engine roaring to life with a cough and a sputter, the vibrations rattling through the seat. I floored it, the tires spinning in the mud before catching, mud spraying behind me in thick, wet arcs as I peeled out, the truck lurching forward. The creature lunged once, a final futile swipe, its claws raking the tailgate with a metallic scream, then receded into the trees, its form swallowed by the shadows as I hit the gravel road. I didn't stop driving until I reached the main highway, my hands clamped on the wheel, my breath ragged, my shirt soaked through with sweat and swamp water. An old sedan with two fishermen pulled over half a mile down, their faces creasing with concern as I flagged them down, my words tumbling out in a wild, incoherent rush. Something about Troy, the swamp, a thing with claws. They offered to call the sheriff, their voices calm but uncertain, but I waved them off, thanked them through chattering teeth, and drove straight to the nearest town. The claw marks on my truck a silent witness to what I couldn't yet name, a testament etched in steel. The next day, I reported Troy missing, my voice flat and mechanical as I sat in the department office, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a stark contrast to the swamp's dim gloom. I told them we'd been separated during the survey, that I'd lost him in the maze of trees and water, a half-truth that stuck in my throat like a stone. Search teams went out, combed the swamp for 2 days, their boots churning the mud, their voices calling Troy's name into the silence. They found shredded clothing, bits of his flannel shirt, a sleeve caught in a root, scattered bones too small to identify without a lab, and nothing else, no body, just fragments of a life erased by the swamp's hunger. Officially, it was written off as a gator attack, the kind of explanation that fit neatly on a report, a box checked to close the file. Unofficially, the sheriff saw the gouges on my truck, deep and jagged, the metal curled inward like it had been clawed by something stronger than steel should allow. He saw the hollow look in my eyes when I tried to explain, my words halting, my hands trembling as I gripped the coffee mug he'd handed me. He'd grown up here too, knew the stories, the whispers about Dead Man's Hollow, the things that didn't fit in a badge's world, and he didn't push, just nodded and sent me home with a pat on the shoulder that felt like pity. I haven't been back since, haven't set foot in those swamps. The maps of Tract 47 gathering dust in a drawer I don't open. I quit the forestry gig a month later, traded it for a desk job in Baton Rouge, pushing papers under fluorescent lights I'd once fled. But the swamp stays with me. Its smell, a mix of rot and metal I can't wash out. Its silence, a weight that presses on my chest some nights. The weight of those black, glinting eyes, watching me from the shadows of my dreams. I keep a gun close now, a .45 holstered at my side even in the house, its weight a cold comfort against my hip, though I doubt it'd do much against whatever built that nest, whatever tore Troy apart with such deliberate, hungry precision. The scream echoes in my sleep, Troy's voice breaking over and over, a sound I can't unhear, a tether to that clearing I can't cut. Dead Man's Hollow didn't just take him. It took a piece of me, left me hollowed out, scanning the shadows for that creature's jagged grin, wondering if it's still out there, waiting, its hunger unsatisfied. In the summer of 2003, Everett Calhoun stumbled into his own nightmare in the Bitterroot Range of western Montana, a rugged sprawl of pine forests and jagged peaks where the air carried the crisp bite of sap and stone, a world apart from the humid swamps of Louisiana. He was a private investigator, a man who'd spent decades honing his instincts to a razor's edge, chasing the lost and the runaway. People who didn't want to be found, who slipped through the cracks of civilization and left families grasping at ghosts. This time, it was Rosalie Dupré, a young woman in her mid-20s, vanished from a camping trip with friends near a lake in the Bitterroot. Her absence a wound her family couldn't close, a case they begged him to take when the sheriff's search turned up nothing but shrugs and platitudes. Everett parked his beat-up Cherokee on a gravel pullout near the trailhead, the tires crunching against the stones, the engine ticking as it cooled in the mountain air. He stepped out, his boots scuffing the dirt, the forest alive with sound, birds chattering in the treetops, their calls sharp and fleeting, wind whispering through the pine needles like a conversation he couldn't join, rustling the branches with a soft, ceaseless sigh. The trail was overgrown, a narrow ribbon of packed earth winding into the heart of the forest, its edges blurred by ferns and brambles that snagged at his jeans as he walked, their thorns leaving faint scratches on the denim. He carried a pack, water, a camera, a map, a knife sheathed at his belt, and a .38 revolver holstered under his jacket, its weight a familiar reassurance against his ribs. He'd been at this game long enough to know the wild could turn on you, though he'd never faced anything worse than a spooked bear or a drunk hunter with a bad aim. An hour in, the sounds began to fade, the birds falling silent one by one, their chatter snuffed out as if a hand had closed over their throats. The wind stilled, leaving only the crunch of his boots on the pine-strewn earth, the needles dry and brittle underfoot. 2 miles from the trailhead, he found her boot, scuffed and damp, lying on its side in a patch of moss, the leather cold to the touch, its laces frayed but intact. He crouched, turning it over in his hands, the sole worn from miles of trails, a faint trace of mud clinging to the tread. Rosalie's, he was sure, matching the description her friends had given. Brown hiking boots, size 7, a brand logo half worn off the heel. A few feet away, signs of a struggle, broken branches, their ends splintered and jagged. A scattering of pine needles disturbed in a wide arc. Claw marks gouged deep into the bark of a pine, wider and more ragged than any bear's, the wood torn as if something had raked it in fury, the sap still sticky where it bled from the wounds. Everett snapped a photo, the camera's click loud in the silence, and marked the spot on his map, his pencil scratching against the paper with a faint, deliberate sound. The forest darkened as he pressed on, the trees leaning in, their branches clawing at his jacket like skeletal fingers, the air growing heavy with a damp, earthy musk that settled in his lungs. A mix of pine resin, wet moss, and something fainter, sweeter, like fruit left to rot. The unease settled in his gut, a nagging itch he couldn't scratch, a feeling he'd learned to trust over years of chasing shadows, though he told himself it was just the isolation, the absence of human presence playing tricks on his mind. He reached the campsite an hour later, What remained of it? Anyway, the fire pit was cold. A ring of stones cradling a pile of ashes long extinguished, gray and powdery, untouched by wind or rain. A few shredded scraps of fabric clung to the branches of a nearby pine, fluttering in the faint breeze like mournful flags. A strip of blue nylon, a corner of a red shirt, their edges frayed and torn, not cut. The ground was scuffed. The dirt churned in uneven patches, as if something heavy had moved through, dragging or stomping. A sickly sweet stench hit him, sharp and cloying, like roadkill baking under a relentless sun, and he followed it, his boots sinking into the softer earth near a cluster of bushes. There, a deer carcass, or what was left of it, sprawled across the clearing, its body torn apart, limbs strewn in a haphazard circle, entrails smeared into the dirt in dark, glistening streaks. The head was gone, not chewed or ripped, but severed clean, the neck a smooth, unnatural cut that spoke of intent, not hunger, the stump glistening with dried blood and a faint sheen of flies buzzing lazily in the heat. He crouched, his knees creaking, and studied it, the camera clicking again as he documented the scene, his breath shallow against the stench that coated his throat. He marked the spot, the map crinkling under his fingers, and kept moving, the terrain growing steeper, rockier, the trail dissolving into underbrush as he crested a rise and saw the lake below, dark and glassy, its surface a mirror reflecting the overcast sky, the water still as death save for the occasional ripple from a fish or a falling leaf. He wasn't alone. On the far shore, half hidden by a cluster of reeds, something crouched, its back to him, its movements jerky and precise, like a machine gone wrong. It was tall, 7 feet at least when it stood, its limbs too long, too thin, its posture too human, skinning a rabbit with a precision that turned his stomach, its hands working the blade with a slow, deliberate rhythm, peeling the fur back in strips. Its skin was pale, mottled like birch bark peeling from a trunk, its head large and misshapen, tufts of sparse hair clinging to it like mold. Everett froze, his hand hovering near his revolver, his breath catching as he watched, the silence pressing against his ears. Then it turned and he saw it. No nose, just 2 slits where nostrils should have been, flared and twitching as it scented the air. A mouth stretched wide in a lipless, jagged line across its face, teeth like needles glinting in the dim light, long and sharp, more like a trap than a jaw. Its eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to swallow the light, and they fixed on him, unblinking, a stare that pierced through him and pinned him to the spot. It stood, its body hunched as if its legs couldn't bear the weight, its frame skeletal beneath the patchy skin, and charged, faster than anything that size should move, its limbs flailing in a grotesque, insect-like sprint. Everett drew his knife, the revolver forgotten in the panic, and slashed wildly as it reached him, its claws tearing through his jacket, gouging his shoulder in deep, searing lines that burned like fire. The pain was blinding, a white-hot flare that blurred his vision, and it screamed. A high, keening wail that vibrated through the air itself, a sound that made his ears ring and his head swim, like a needle driven into his skull. He stumbled, swinging the knife again, catching it across the arm, the blade biting deep into the mottled flesh, a thin trickle of dark blood oozing from the cut. But it didn't flinch, didn't slow, its scream rising as it swiped again, claws raking the air where his head had been a heartbeat before. He tripped over a root, hitting the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind from him, the knife skittering across the dirt. The creature loomed over him, its mouth opening impossibly wide, rows of teeth glinting like shards of glass, its breath a rancid gust of rot and decay that made him gag. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped, its head turning sharply as if listening to something he couldn't hear. A sound beyond his range, a call from the woods. It bolted, its gangly limbs carrying it away with that same insect-like speed, vanishing into the trees as if the forest had swallowed it whole. Everett lay there, gasping, his shoulder throbbing, blood soaking through his torn jacket, his knife still clenched in a white-knuckled grip a few feet away. He didn't know how long he stayed there, minutes, maybe an hour, his mind racing, his body trembling with adrenaline and shock, but eventually he forced himself to his feet, retrieving the knife with a groan, the pain a steady pulse in his arm. He staggered back to the jeep, bleeding badly but moving, his steps uneven, his vision swimming with black spots. He drove straight to the sheriff's office in Darby, his shirt soaked with blood, his story spilling out in halting, breathless fragments. Something by the lake, tall, pale, not human. They didn't believe him, of course, their faces creasing with skepticism, their voices polite but dismissive as they took a statement, chalking it up to delirium from blood loss or a bear attack gone wrong. They patched his shoulder, sent him home with a bottle of painkillers and a warning to stay out of the woods until he healed. A week later, searchers found Rosalie, propped against a tree near the lake, her arms folded neatly in her lap, her head missing, the stump clean as if sliced by a blade. Nearby, a crude pile of bones, her friends, missing 2 years prior, lay scattered in the dirt, picked clean and arranged in a rough circle. The case closed as an animal attack, the report filed away, but Everett kept the photos he'd taken that day. The claw marks, the deer, the campsite. Proof locked in a drawer he rarely opened, a silent testament to the pale walker still lurking in those pines, its hollow gaze burned into his memory. He didn't sleep much after that, the nights stretching long and restless, his shoulder aching with every shift in the weather. He'd sit by the window, the revolver on the table beside him, staring into the dark beyond the glass, half expecting to see those needle teeth glinting in the moonlight. The bitterroot had marked him, left him with a scar that ran deeper than the flesh, a question he couldn't answer. What had he seen? A beast? A spirit? A figment of his unraveling mind? He didn't know, only that it was out there, waiting, its hunger a shadow that followed him home. In the damp, cold expanse of Washington's Olympic National Park, Everett Donlin faced his own terror in the fall of 1999, working for NamUs, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, to track Josh Pelham, a 21-year-old geology student missing from a solo hike. The forest was a cathedral of green, its trees towering and dripping with moisture, their trunks cloaked in moss that hung in thick, wet curtains, the air heavy with the scent of cedar and earth, a musk that clung to his clothes as he walked. He'd parked near Forks. Yes, that Forks, the one the vampire movies would later claim, and followed an unofficial trail the cashier at the supply store had mentioned, her voice dropping low when she warned him it wasn't on any map, her eyes flickering with something like fear. Josh had asked about it, she'd said. A bright kid with a grin and a backpack full of gear. Last seen buying granola bars and a topo map 3 weeks prior. His parents had handed Everett a photo. Josh on a ridge, wind in his hair, grinning like he owned the world, and a plea to find him. Their hope fraying with every day he didn't call. The forest breathed around him, the canopy filtering the light into a dim, gray-green haze. The ground soft with fallen needles and mud that sucked at his boots with every step. He carried a pack, water, a radio, a knife, and a .45 pistol holstered at his side, its weight a steady anchor against the wild's unpredictability. An hour in, he found Josh's pack, caught in a snarl of brambles, its straps torn, a section of shirt still attached. Green cotton, ripped with 3 deep, claw-like slashes that cut through the fabric but left no blood, just the eerie precision of the tears. He crouched, running his fingers along the edges, the threads frayed but clean, the pack's contents spilling out. Granola wrappers, a cracked compass, a notebook with geological sketches smudged by damp. He radioed Fiona Curtis, the ranger assigned to assist, her voice crackling through the static. Found his pack. Looks like a struggle. Bear. Don't think so, he replied. No blood, just scratches. Weird ones. She told him to keep going. She'd circle back from the ridge trails to meet him, her tone clipped and professional, the kind of no-nonsense edge he respected. He pressed on, the forest growing thicker, the trees closing in, their branches tangling overhead to block out what little light remained, the air cooling as the moisture seeped into his jacket. At the campsite, a cold fire pit sat beside a shredded shoe. Josh's, matching the parents' description, its laces frayed and soaked, the sole peeled back like skin flayed from bone. Nearby, faint drag marks scarred the earth, a narrow trail of disturbed needles and mud leading into the denser woods, the kind of sign that set his pulse racing, a quiet alarm ringing in his gut. He followed, his boots sinking deeper, the silence pressing against his ears. No birds, no wind, just the soft crunch of his steps and the faint drip of water from the leaves. The trail ended at a shallow cave, its mouth a dark gash in the hillside, the air inside cool and damp, heavy with the smell of earth and something sharper. Copper, rot, a scent that caught in his throat and wouldn't let go. Inside, Josh's body lay propped against the wall, his chest crudely opened, ribs cracked and spread, organs gone, the cavity a dark, glistening hollow. Bones surrounded him, animal and human, arranged in deliberate patterns, spirals and lines scratched into the dirt. A macabre gallery that spoke of intent, not instinct. Everett froze, his flashlight beam trembling as it swept the cave, his breath shallow against the stench that coated his lungs. He reached for his radio, his thumb slick with sweat, but before he could call it in, a shadow moved. A gaunt man stepping from behind a boulder, tall and filthy, his face streaked with dirt and dried blood, his clothes a mismatched patchwork of scavenged fabric. He held a machete, its blade smeared with dark stains, and stared at Everett with a tilted head, silent, studying him like a predator sizing up prey. Everett shouted, "Hey, who are you? Did you see the guy I'm looking for?" His voice steady despite the tremor in his chest, but the man smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of chipped, yellowed teeth, and pulled the machete from behind his back, its edge glinting in the flashlight's beam. Everett didn't wait, bolting from the cave as the man lunged, the blade whistling through the air inches from his back, slamming into the cave wall with a clang that echoed through the cramped space. He crashed through the underbrush, branches snapping underfoot, his radio bouncing uselessly against his chest, the man's heavy boots pounding the ground behind him, a relentless rhythm that matched the thudding in his ears. Everett wasn't a runner, but adrenaline pushed him past his limits, his lungs screaming, his legs burning as he burst into a small clearing and spotted a narrow creek. Without thinking, he plunged in, the icy water soaking his boots and jeans, numbing his calves as he sprinted downstream, hoping to mask his trail in the current. He stopped, crouching behind a fallen log, the forest silent save for the faint trickle of water. His breath ragged as he counted the seconds, then minutes, 5, 10, 20. Nothing. No footsteps, no rustling, just the stillness pressing in, a weight that made his skin crawl. He doubled back, sticking close to the creek, the drag marks reappearing in the mud, leading him back to the cave. Inside, Josh was still there, untouched, but the man was gone, the machete missing, the air thick with the same coppery rot. He found Fiona an hour later, limping down the trail, a gash on her leg bleeding through her pants, her face pale but set with determination. She'd been ambushed by a second man, she said, a wiry figure with a knife who'd come at her from the ridge, but she'd fought him off, lost him in the trees. They radioed for backup, the signal weak but holding, and within hours, a search team swarmed the area, their voices cutting through the silence as they swept the cave. They found more, bones from at least 3 others, scattered in the dirt, some fresh, some old, a hunting ground hidden in plain sight. The man Everett fought was later identified as Calvin Mackey, a drifter linked to disappearances along the coast. His DNA on the machete they recovered days later from a streambed. His partner turned up dead weeks after, shot by an unknown party deep in the forest, his body half buried in mud. Mackey vanished, his shadow lingering in those woods, a predator the Olympics swallowed whole. Everett didn't go back, didn't take another wilderness case for months, the cave haunting his nights. The bones, the patterns, Josh's empty stare. He kept the radio logs, the photos he'd snapped in the dark, a record no one asked to see, a weight he carried alone. The forest had shown him something, human, yes, but feral, a hunger that wore a man's skin and hunted with a beast's patience. He wondered, late at night, if Mackey was still out there, waiting, or if the woods had claimed him too, their silence a tomb for both prey and predator. Warren Cale faced his monster in Pennsylvania's Allegheny National Forest in the fall of 2008. A private investigator hired to find Samantha Connors after her boyfriend Derek's mauled body was discovered by a search team. his torso ripped apart, his leg gone. The report a mess of conflicting guesses. Bear, wolf, something else. The forest was ancient, unyielding, its canopy a dense weave of oak and pine, the underbrush clawing at his pants as he hiked in from Kane. A small town on the edge where the diner served a questionable mountain meatloaf, and the locals whispered about the Twin Lakes trailhead. Samantha's family didn't trust the authorities to dig deeper, their faith eroded by days of silence, and Warren, 38, married, fond of telling his wife he'd quit these cases when the universe gave him a sign. Took the job, driven by a stubborn optimism he couldn't shake, a need to bring her home alive, though he knew the odds were grim. He hit the trail early, the air crisp with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, the forest stretching out in all directions, its shadows long and jagged in the morning light. He carried a small pack, water, protein bars, a first aid kit, and a .357 revolver holstered at his side, its grip worn smooth from years of use, a definitive option he preferred over bear spray's uncertainty. The first couple of hours were uneventful, just him and the distant chatter of woodpeckers, their staccato tapping echoing through the trees, the underbrush rustling with squirrels or wind. Around noon, he reached a clearing where search teams had camped before calling it off, their presence marked by a tree carved with Derek's name and coordinates, the bark peeled back to expose pale wood beneath. The smell of damp earth lingered, a distinct mix of moss and decay that clung to the air, a scent that thickened as he moved closer to where Derek had been found. The report said Derek had been ripped apart, his torso bearing bite marks too wide for a bear, too deep for a wolf, his left leg gone entirely, not dragged off, not eaten, just missing as if discarded. Predators don't waste meals, but Derek had been mauled and left, his blood now a dark brown stain against the leaves. The ground churned with broken branches and scuffed dirt. Warren crouched, studying the scene, his fingers brushing the soil, cool, damp, disturbed in a wide arc, a story of violence etched into the earth. Another set of tracks led away, erratic, zigzagging, not boots, not paws, but hoof-like, uneven, their edges deep and sharp, as if something heavy had staggered off, unsteady but deliberate. He measured one with his hand, the imprint wider than his palm, the depth suggesting weight, strength, something that didn't fit the forest's natural order. A scent hit him. Not the earthy dampness, but something sharper, metallic, blood-old and pungent. A trail that pulled him deeper into the woods, each step heavy with the feeling he wasn't alone, the hairs on his arms prickling as if brushed by unseen eyes. The daylight waned, the forest darkening, and he came to a ravine, a narrow log bridge spanning it, barely wider than a balance beam, its surface slick with moss and rot, the drop below a jagged maw of rocks like the teeth of a waiting predator. It didn't feel right, the bridge a lure, the air too still, but he crossed, one hand gripping a branch above for balance, his boots slipping on the wet wood, his revolver drawn and steady in the other. Halfway across, he heard it, a rustling, sharp and intentional, something big moving in the underbrush behind him, the sound growing louder, closer, a deliberate stalking that tightened his grip on the gun. He stopped, waited, the silence that followed ringing in his ears, a void that pressed against his skull. The smell returned, stronger now, like a butcher's floor, blood, meat, a tang that made his stomach turn. He crossed quickly, scanning the forest beyond, his gut screaming he was being watched, the shadows shifting just beyond his sight. A mile farther, he stumbled on Samantha's backpack, her name stitched on the inside tag in faded thread. The canvas slashed open, its contents scattered, torn clothes, an empty water bottle, a trail map smeared with red fingerprints, the ink blurred by damp and blood. He called out, "Samantha!" His voice swallowed by the trees, the quiet that followed heavier than any response, a weight that settled in his chest. A sound broke through, low, guttural breathing, steady and deliberate, a rhythm that raised the hairs on his neck. He pivoted, gun raised, and saw movement in the trees. A flicker at first, a trick of the fading light, then it stepped into view slowly, as if it didn't care he was watching. It stood upright on legs that bent awkwardly, like a deer on broken stilts, its torso broad and hunched, patches of coarse, uneven fur clinging to its frame, matted with dirt and something darker. Its hands, if you could call them that, ended in jagged, claw-like appendages, caked with dried blood and filth, flexing as it moved. Its mouth hung slightly open, revealing teeth jagged as glass shards, yellowed and sharp, and it had antlers, twisted, uneven, sprouting from its head like a mockery of a crown, dripping something dark and viscous, too black for blood, pooling at its feet. It sniffed the air, its mouth curling upward in a grotesque approximation of a grin, and Warren fired without hesitation, the revolver's roar splitting the silence, the bullet hitting it square in the chest. It staggered back, a dark stain spreading across its fur, but didn't fall, its cry a sharp, bone-rattling shriek that echoed through the ravine, a sound that vibrated in his bones and made his vision blur. It lunged, faster than he'd expected, and he dove to the side, the claws tearing through the air where his head had been, the wind of their passage cold against his face. The gun clattered to the ground, skidding across the dirt, and he scrambled to his feet, grabbing a branch and swinging wildly, connecting with its arm. A solid thud, a hiss from its throat as it retreated a step. He retrieved the revolver, heart pounding, and fired again, the shot grazing its antlers, splintering the twisted bone with a crack that sent shards flying. It roared, more furious than wounded, and charged, its hooves pounding the earth, the ground trembling beneath its weight. Warren ran, not out of cowardice but survival, a tactical retreat, or more honestly running like hell, his lungs burning, his legs pumping through the underbrush, the creature's pursuit a freight train of sound crashing behind him. He reached the ravine, the log bridge looming, and didn't stop, crossing it in a blind sprint, the wood groaning under his weight, his boots slipping as he glanced back. It hesitated at the edge, pacing, sniffing the air, then let out another shrill, bone-chilling cry before retreating into the shadows, its form swallowed by the forest's embrace. He kept moving, needing distance, needing daylight, until he stumbled into a search team's abandoned outpost as the sun dipped below the horizon, its last light filtering through the trees in thin, golden streaks. The outpost was stripped bare save for a rusted hatchet and a dented can of beans, and he barricaded the door with a broken chair, revolver in hand, eyes fixed on the single window, the glass cracked and smudged with years of neglect. The forest came alive with noises as night fell, the chirp of insects, the distant hoot of an owl, and something else, something bigger, pacing just beyond the tree line, its steps a faint, deliberate crunch in the underbrush. He didn't sleep, the revolver's grip slick with sweat, his mind replaying the creature's grin, its antlers, the way it moved, too fast, too wrong. Morning came slow, the first light cold and gray, settling in his bones as he ventured out, the air sharp with frost. He followed the tracks again, more determined now, Samantha's fate a weight he couldn't shake. They led to a cave, its entrance obscured by overgrown vines, the stench emanating from it unbearable, decay and death mingling in a sickening cocktail that made his eyes water. He hesitated, the flashlight cutting through the darkness as he stepped inside, the beam trembling in his hand. The cave was shallow, a hollow in the rock, but what it held turned his stomach, bones, human and animal, piled haphazardly, gnawed and cracked open for marrow, scraps of clothing hanging from jagged rocks like tattered flags. Samantha's jacket was among them, torn and bloodied, its blue fabric stark against the gray stone. In the corner, he found her, or what was left of her, slumped against the wall, her face frozen in a final expression of terror, her hands clutching a rock, its edge stained red with blood not her own. It took him a moment to see it. A deep gash across the creature's chest, crusted and dark, a wound that hadn't been there before. She'd fought back, gone down swinging, her defiance etched in the stone and the blood she'd drawn. Warren retrieved her remains, wrapping them in a tarp from the outpost, his hands steady despite the ache in his chest, and made his way back, the forest quieter now, as if holding its breath. He flagged down a ranger's truck at the trailhead, the man staring at the bundle in his arms, then at the blood and dirt covering Warren, and didn't ask questions, just called for backup. The authorities swarmed the area, the autopsy later revealing bite marks that didn't match any known animal, but the case closed as an animal attack, the explanation a thin veil over the truth. 2 weeks later, A hunter's body turned up near the same area, his head lodged on a broken branch 20 feet up, antlers shoved through his chest like a grotesque display, a message Warren couldn't unread. He didn't take another case in the Allegheny, told his wife the universe had given him its sign. A nightmare dressed in fur and antlers, a hunger that didn't die with Samantha's fight. He kept the revolver loaded, the map marked with that cave a secret he buried in a drawer. The creature's cry a sound that woke him some nights, its shadow pacing just beyond the edge of his dreams. These stories, mine in the swamp, Everett's in the pines, Donlan's in the cave, Warren's in the ravine, stitched together a tapestry of unseen hunger, a thread of dread that winds through the wild places we think we know, the hollows we tread with careless steps. Dead man's hollow carved me hollow, its creature's gaze a weight I carry, Troy's scream a sound I can't unhear, a tether to that nest I can't break. Everett Calhoun bears the pale walker's scar, a question mark etched in his shoulder, a shadow that watches from the bitter root's edge. Everett Donlan holds the cave's silence, Mackey's grin a ghost in the Olympics' damp dark, a predator he can't bury. Warren Cale carries the antlered thing's roar, Samantha's fight a fire that burns in his chest, the Allegheny map he won't unfold. What waits in the dark? Beast, man, or something worse? Something older, hungrier, born from the hollows we've forgotten to fear? I don't have answers, only scars and a 45 I keep loaded, its weight a cold comfort against the night, knowing it's not enough. The wild watches, its hunger patient, its silence a promise.